Gardens for cancer patients. Cancer survivors find comfort through gardening. As Kelly White Rubin listens to the sounds of hummingbirds that flutter nearby, she works in her garden, digging out the bee balm that spreads with reckless abandon. Some might consider this work, but to White Rubin it imparts a sense of calm. Listening to birds sing, feeling the sun on her face and reveling in the miracle of watching seedlings grow into something beautiful or tasty does her soul good, even as it requires physical exertion and stamina. 19 years ago, White Rubin didn't have much stamina. After her first routine mammogram at 40, she was found to have breast cancer. She underwent 2 surgeries, radiation and chemotherapy over the course of about a year. I was pretty weak when I was going through therapy and had a 2- and 4-year-old, she remembered. But after I got my strength back, I started working in the yard. White Rubin gradually transformed her yards into an oasis, replete with herbs, berries, 3 seasons of flowers, and the wildlife they bring. Butterflies, bees, orioles, and blue jays. She and her husband David Rubin enjoy sitting in the garden, surrounded by a revolving door of seasonal color from hyacinths, bluebells, lupines, Chinese lanterns, hydrangeas, bridal veil, feverfew, tiger lilies, and oriental poppies. White Rubin daily enjoys the retreat she's created. I just feel very relaxed when I'm working in the yard, she said. I don't know what it is about a garden. There's just something about it. Stopping to smell the roses. Karen Gleason believes that something is inner peace. As Vice President of Cancer Services for Northwell Health, she sees firsthand the stress, both physical and mental, that cancer patients experience. This is a difficult time in their lives, she said, and having the ability to go to a garden setting gives them the ability to stop and transform by looking at the beautiful colors, sights, and scents. It's a peaceful and timeless environment for them to go for a while. Pretty in pink. Vera Caponia admires the walkway she calls her breast cancer garden. On the soil sits a pink ribbon mosaic stepping stone that Caponia crafted from pink tiles. When she planted the area, she was recovering from a stressful year, building up a new business, illustrating 4 books with crazy deadlines, raising 3 children, moving her family of 5 while their house underwent an extensive renovation, and receiving a breast cancer diagnosis. Many people gave me pink ribbon pins that year, and the summer I returned to the house, I just kept buying pink annuals and soon started buying pink perennials, said Caponia, 59. I always have in the back of my head what my surgeon said to me, that stress caused this. The only other risk factor I had for cancer was that I didn't exercise, so I started walking and running and continued vegetable gardening, she said. Garden therapy. When Abby Lovitz Melendez got a diagnosis of cancer, it was a shock, she recalled. Cancer doesn't happen to you, it happens to everyone else, she said, explaining how incredulous she was at the time. I was working full-time and had 3 young children, and I was worried about my life and that I wouldn't be there for my kids and my husband. It was difficult to keep her spirits up. It was very easy to stay in the house and be depressed at that time, she said. However, Melendez had marigolds, black-eyed Susans, lilacs, and crepe myrtles. Gardening got me outside, she said. Just being in the fresh air sort of healed me and made me thankful. There's something healing about watching something come to life because it reminds you that life goes on, she said. I even like weeding. I hear the birds, see the squirrels, catch the slugs, and see the neighborhood dogs put their snouts under the fence, Melendez said. It's very calming to me, It brings me peace and takes my mind off things. Vocabulary focus. Impart. Exertion. Stamina. Replete. Incredulous. Slug. Snout.
A subject, but it's also bringing beauty into pain, really. We're talking about cancer, which we do often in advance, but we're talking about gardens for cancer patients. Before we get into the specifics of what this does for cancer patients, I just want to ask our panelists, do you enjoy gardening or maybe going out and viewing flowers and nature or something, Pauline? I think most of us who know you know the answer to that already, but share it with us.
Yes, well, I think most people know I love nature. I love going out and enjoying other people's gardens or just, the gardens that nature creates on its own out in the wild. Gardening itself, actually, some of you might know I used to work with my husband and his family's bed and breakfast and butterfly garden in Costa Rica, and my main role was working in the butterfly garden. And a lot of the work there was actually gardening. It was finding the plants that the host plant for the butterfly and propagating them so that they would be a living for the butterflies to do their life cycle with. So actually, I got really into gardening when I was down there. That's the only time I've ever really done gardening, but I'd love to get into it again.
So can you tell us a little, I'm interested in knowing more about that. What did that entail? Like, what did a day look like in the gardens of Costa Rica?
Oh, well, a lot of different things. Of course, it involves a lot of watering. It also involves weeding and pruning, trying to get rid of the bad plants that you don't want so that there's more of the good ones that you do want. I also did a lot of just hiking around and looking to try and find the exact type of flowering plant that I wanted for the garden, or maybe not flowering, just the type of plants that were the right kind for butterflies. So I would go out and then I would take cuttings of those plants, bring them back to our area, and try and get them to propagate in our garden. So I did a lot of that.
Pauline, does that mean that you kind of know the names of a lot of different plants? Like you see one out in nature and you're like, I know that one, I know the name of that.
Well, I am very specialized in some very specific types of plants.
Okay.
So, for example, in Costa Rica, in the neotropical area, there are a lot of butterflies that use different types of passion flower vine as their host plant. So I got really good at being able to identify those. I always had my eyes out for that. So I will actually still see those in Taiwan. I just have developed an eye to look for passion flower vines. There aren't as many varieties here, and they're actually not a host plant for butterflies here, but I do still end up noticing those because that was like kind of my specialty.
That is cool. All right, Rebecca, do you enjoy gardening or maybe just viewing flowers in nature? Everyone likes to see flowers, I guess, but do you have a special interest in them?
Yeah, I actually really like what Pauline was saying. I enjoy other people's gardens because I really enjoy looking at flowers or especially other people's gardens or out in nature, but I don't garden myself. My dad did. My dad had a vegetable garden in our home, and he spent a lot of his free time doing his vegetable garden. Yeah. So I helped sometimes, but it's a lot of work. Like Pauline was saying, there's a lot of weeding you have to do, a lot of watering, and then gardening is a lot of hard work.
It is a lot of work, and I remember my grandma, she was basically a small farmer. She would have a vegetable garden as well. She would grow corn and beans and all sorts of things. I remember helping her with some of that. But I'm not so familiar with the flower garden. I enjoy flowers and so forth. But some people, Pauline, they find it very therapeutic. Did you find that to be the case in your work?
Well, I think many people would say that just being outdoors is really therapeutic, right? Being out in nature. And then I think there is something really good about working with our hands. And, you know, sometimes you say getting your hands dirty, and it doesn't literally mean getting your hands dirty. Sometimes that means just like getting in and doing something. In this case, though, literally getting your hands dirty. And I think there is something good for the spirit about that. And for many of us who work office jobs or inside, just sitting at a desk, it's actually, I think, a really positive thing both for our
spirit and for our bodies to go out and do physical, work outside in nature.
We have to sometimes force ourselves to do that, right? And we use this word therapeutic. That means it's just good for you. It's kind of like going through a therapy session with a counselor, so to speak. It's good for your soul. Well, we are on page 36, and right now we'll have our first reading. We'll read the left-hand column there down through line 19.
Gardens for cancer patients. Cancer survivors find comfort through gardening. As Kelly White Rubin listens to the sounds of hummingbirds that flutter nearby, she works in her garden, digging out the bee balm that spreads with reckless abandon. Some might consider this work, but to White Rubin it imparts a sense of calm. Listening to birds sing, feeling the sun on her face and reveling in the miracle of watching seedlings grow into something beautiful or tasty does her soul good, even as it requires physical exertion and stamina. 19 years ago, White Rubin didn't have much stamina. After her first routine mammogram at 40, she was found to have breast cancer. She underwent 2 surgeries, radiation and chemotherapy over the course of about a year. I was pretty weak when I was going through therapy and had a 2- and 4-year-old, she remembered. But after I got my strength back, I started working in the yard.
Well, we meet a lady here at the very beginning. Her name is Kelly White Rubin. And she's listening to the sounds of hummingbirds that are fluttering nearby. And when you see that word flutter, I actually think of a bird, Pauline.
I usually think of butterflies, but that might be
too.
my...
Yeah, that's true. I wonder why.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Well, it's like a flying, sound of wings flying.
And it's like the quick flapping of the wings, right, in a delicate way.
Right. You actually, I guess you could also maybe say that, the curtains are fluttering in the wind, that sound of something moving, vibrating quickly in the air.
Right. So she's working in her garden and she's digging out the bee balm. Now, I was not familiar with bee balm before reading this article, but it is an herb of the mint family and it actually attracts hummingbirds and butterflies and bees.
Oh, interesting.
Are you familiar with this?
I am not familiar with that. I would have assumed that it was a weed because she is trying to dig it out. She's trying to get rid of it because it's spreading all over.
So to her, it was kind of like a weed because it was spreading all over. That's what I thought too because she says, that it's spreading with reckless abandon, Rebecca.
Yeah, reckless abandon. It means there's no structure to it. It's just spreading out. And when I think of reckless abandon, I think of banana trees because here in Asia we have a lot of banana trees, and banana trees are amazing. Once you have one in the ground, you don't need to plant another one. It will propagate itself, and the whole land will be full of banana trees because that once happened to my backyard.
Really? Wow.
So when you have reckless abandon, it means it's just there's no rules, there's no structure, it's just going free.
That's great. You never need to buy bananas.
That's right. And it's not necessarily a negative thing. We use the word reckless abandon also in terms of a people's behavior. We might say she threw herself into the dance with reckless abandon. And it does have kind of a wildness, but it's also unconstrained and can also include a sense of joy.
Right.
But here we're kind of using it actually in a more unusual way, but it's really talking about how this you just can't control. It's that wild, uncontrolled.
Yeah. All right. Well, some might consider this work. So if you don't enjoy gardening, maybe you want some flowers, you have to go out and you have to pull the weeds. You consider it work. I would probably be that way. I would consider it work. But to White Rubin, it's not work, is it, Rebecca?
It imparts a sense of calm. And impart is basically to give something a feeling basically a feeling. So she receives a sense of calm, you can say. She feels very calm.
Right. She gets this sense of calm, and then she's listening to the birds seeing and she's feeling the sun on her face. So you get the idea here. It's a relaxing atmosphere.
Right. I like the word that we use here. It says reveling in the miracle of watching seedlings grow and all these different things. Reveling is just like a beautiful word for describing like a great deal of joy. Like you're really taking a great deal of joy and satisfaction in something. And it's just like an extreme, like an extra level of joy.
Yeah.
Like it's a very high level of enjoyment.
So we see here she's enjoying this process. She's taking it all in, basically. And then talks about the seedlings growing, and she describes this as a miracle. A seedling is a young plant grown from a seed. And they grow into something beautiful or tasty, right? Maybe she's growing some vegetables and so forth. And that does her soul good.
Yeah, I really like this phrase, does your something good. There used to be, for a very long time in the United States, we used to have these milk ads that says, milk does the body good.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was just like kind of a catchy way of saying is healthy. Or in here, does her soul good. You could also say is good for your soul, but it's just like a different turn of phrase for that. And they're kind of contrasting. While on one hand, it is work. It requires it. It does take a lot of physical work, exertion, stamina. It means like hard work over that's not just like a burst of it. You have to do it for a while. But it's good for your soul, and it's also relaxing while being exerting, which sometimes we don't think of those things as going together, but they're saying it really does for her.
And physical work can be that way. It can be hard work, but it can be rewarding in the sense that maybe it provides some sort of therapeutic value.
Right, and just because something's not relaxing for your physical body, your body is exerted and not feeling relaxed, it might be relaxing for your spirit, for your mind. You know, takes your mind off maybe your worries because you're just putting all your focus on just a physical task.
Yeah.
So sometimes, laying on the couch may be physically relaxing, but may not be the most relaxing for your mind or your spirit, right? It might leave you too much space to just be thinking, and being upset, which is not relaxing for your spirit, right?
Right.
Versus maybe being in the garden, working hard, really relaxes your mind and soul.
Very good. So that brings me to a question. What is an activity that you like to do that kind of refreshes you, that kind of does something to your soul to refresh it? Rebecca?
Well, for me, it's swimming.
Okay.
Because I have back problems. And because of my back problems, I had to learn swimming. And when I swim, my back doesn't hurt. And then my mind feels very calm.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
For me, it's usually hiking outdoors. I also, I'm not a fast hiker because I like to revel in nature around me.
You're going to stop and look at this. And
I have my camera with me, and I'm stopping every other minute to take a picture of any bug I see, turning leaves to see if I can find caterpillars.
So if you're really
or eggs.
in just for the hike, don't go with Pauline.
Don't go with me. I always warn people. But for me, it's very relaxing. It does take, I don't think about anything else because all of my focus is just on like trying to like find all the little treasures in natures that are around me that if I'm not really paying attention, I'll miss. And for me, that's very relaxing because like you said, it takes your mind off all the other things you might be worrying about or thinking about and makes you present to just that time and place.
That's great. For me, it's running, which I've shared that many times. I like to run. But one reason I like to run is because I can do something else while I'm running. I can listen to something and kind of feed my brain. And that can be very therapeutic as well. So you can think about what is something you can do to kind of add life to you. And for these people, it's gardening. And we talked about the words exertion and stamina already. Of course, exertion can be physical or mental, and the stamina can be, the physical or mental strength to do something. Well, 19 years ago, Rebecca, what happened with Kelly White Rubin?
She went in for a mammogram, and a mammogram is basically an X-ray of your breast. And this is a procedure, or this is an exam that usually women don't do until they're 35 and over. And during this exam, she found out she had breast cancer.
Mm-hmm. Now, she said this was her first routine mammogram, and that can be kind of confusing. Why do you say first routine? Pauline?
Well, just because she's going to start taking, right? Like Rebecca said, this isn't a test or a exam that you do in your younger years, but when you start taking them, then you know you're going to start a routine of it. Usually once a year you do it. And 40, is not terribly old to start doing that.
No.
Like Rebecca said, some people start a little earlier, especially if they maybe have some family history with it. They'll be told, maybe you need to start taking a mammogram once a year a little sooner. But 40 is about the average time. And it was a shock for her, though, because this was her first time to go in. It's just a routine every day, not every day, but kind of just the normal thing that she knows she's going to have to start doing once a year.
Maybe on a yearly basis,
just a little check, and all of a sudden she gets this really devastating news that she has breast cancer.
Right.
And it sounds like it was pretty serious. She had to do 2 surgeries plus radiation and chemotherapy over the course of that next year.
It is devastating, and that's why the American Cancer Society gives you suggestions for when to get mammograms. They say all women should begin having yearly mammograms by age 45 and can change to having mammograms every other year beginning at age 55. And of course, if you're younger, you can do it if that's your choice, but that's what they suggest. And so sometimes we don't want to go to the doctor, but we need to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, it really depends on your body as well, because even though the recommendations, the age is a lot older, some women, their bodies need mammograms more because it's easier for their bodies to develop lumps or I guess you call them bubbles in your breast. Like, for example, I do mammograms routinely because my body is one of those bodies that need more checks because it's just easier for me to develop bubbles or lumps.
Yeah.
So it's just something I have to do. So you have to know your body. But I think the key here is it's really important to get routine medical exams because when you do routine, which is like you do that, like let's say once a year, once every 2 years, you do routine medical exams, you can often identify the problem earlier.
Yes, key.
Right. Absolutely. And going back to that kind of our storyline here of, it says she's been doing this hard physical work in her garden and doing weeding and, stuff that takes physical exertion and stamina. We've heard about that in the first couple of paragraphs. And now we get this contrast of, 19 years ago when she was 40, all of a sudden this happens to her. And radiation and chemotherapy are hard on your body, and she didn't have stamina. All of a sudden, she was very weak. She couldn't be out there gardening and weeding and, digging in the dirt. And I was thinking, it reminds me that when you're healthy, going out and doing hard physical labor like weeding or digging holes just sounds like work. It does not sound like, oh, what a joy that I can go out and do that, right? But then when that's taken away, right? And in this case, she got it back. It sounds like you suddenly realize what a gift it is that you're able to go out and do that work, that you can engage in life in that way. And I think there is a really important lesson there as well.
That's right. We often take our health for granted, and then when it's gone, we get sick, we realize, wow, what a gift that is.
Right. Why wasn't I taking advantage of it when I had that strength to go out and do those things?
Really good point for all of us. Well, she says she was pretty weak when she was going through therapy. She also had a 2- and 4-year-old at the time, so imagine going through all of this cancer treatment, and then you also have 2 kids at that age. That's not easy, of course. But after I got my strength back, she said, I started working in the yard. So in our next section, we're going to learn more about some of the flowers and some of the butterflies and bees and all those kinds of insects and so forth. So let's get into that as we go to our next reading. We're going to be on the right-hand column, and we're going to go down through line 14.
White Reuben gradually transformed her yards into an oasis, replete with herbs, berries, 3 seasons of flowers, and the wildlife they bring: butterflies, bees, orioles, and blue jays. She and her husband, David Reuben, enjoy sitting in the garden, surrounded by a revolving door of seasonal color from hyacinths, bluebells, lupines, Chinese lanterns, hydrangeas, bridal veil, feverfew, tiger lilies, and oriental poppies. White Reuben daily enjoys the retreat she's created, I just feel very relaxed when I'm working in the yard, she said. I don't know what it is about a garden. There's just something about it.
Kelly White Rubin says that she transformed her yards into an oasis. The writer describes it that way. I like that description. You know, what is an oasis for you, right? For me, it's running by the riverside. I love that. I would describe that as an oasis. What do we mean, Pauline, when we're talking about something as an oasis?
Well, usually it's a place that we think of as beautiful and imparts peace.
I think it comes from the desert, right? You're going to the desert and there's an oasis. I guess that's the literal term of that. There's some water there, right? And it refreshes you. So what refreshes you for White Rubin? It is this garden. And she describes it here, and she starts off saying, Rebecca, it's replete with herbs.
So replete is basically just well supplied or full of, full of herbs, berries, and lots of flowers.
Yeah.
Right. So there's not just a few. It gives you the idea of it's just abundant. It's just full of these things, full of herbs and berries and three seasons of flowers and wildlife. It's just giving this idea of just abundance, so much happening in this garden. And not only are all these plants, but it's also attracting wildlife. They tell us butterflies, my favorite, bees, orioles, and blue jays. Orioles and blue jays, just so you know, those are types of birds.
Yeah. So she and her husband, David Rubin, they enjoy sitting out there in the garden, and they're surrounded by a revolving door of seasonal color. That idea of a revolving door is it's everywhere, right? A revolving door goes round and around, right? And so it's the idea of they're surrounded by all of this beauty. And we get a description here of what types of flowers that they have. And maybe you're familiar with some of these, and maybe some of them you are not. Unfortunately, we don't have pictures of all of these. It's kind of a lot to describe at once, but you can do more research on that if you're interested in those.
Well, and this is an example of details that really aren't important for understanding the story.
That's right.
And the author, I don't think, really cares if you know exactly what these flowers are. It's just to add to this sense of it's not just one type of flower that they have there. As you read it, you just realize, oh, there are a lot of different flowers, probably lots of different colors. And if you know a few of them, it just adds even more of a picture in your head.
That's right. So White Rubin daily enjoys the retreat she's created. So she can just go to a retreat right there in her own yard. She says, I just feel very relaxed when I'm working in the yard. And she says, I don't know what it is about a garden. There's just something about it.
Yeah, I like this phrase. There's just something about her, you can also say, which means it's always a good thing, I would say. We pretty much always... Well, actually, no, maybe not. I guess it depends on how you say it. Because I don't know. There's just something about
the tone
her.
matters.
You're right. Actually, it could be a negative thing.
Yeah.
So it actually, it can mean so many things. It's just something about. It is really vague.
You can't quite put your finger on it. You can't
I have a feeling there's something going on here that I can't quite pinpoint. And depending on the tone of how they say it, there's something good or there's something not good. Here it's good.
Yes, here it is good. And that is a good phrase to know. It's kind of vague and on what a person means by that. They're not quite sure about it. But in this case, it's something really good. Just can't quite put words to it. Well, as we come to the end of today's program, we're going to have one more reading to kind of give more background to maybe why people gain so much from doing this type of gardening. As we go to our last section, entitled Stopping to Smell the Roses, we'll find out more about that.
Stopping to smell the roses. Karen Gleason believes that something is inner peace. As Vice President of Cancer Services for Northwell Health, she sees firsthand the stress, both physical and mental, that cancer patients experience. This is a difficult time in their lives, she said, and having the ability to go to a garden setting gives them the ability to stop and transform by looking at the beautiful colors, sights, and scents. It's a peaceful and timeless environment for them to go for a while.
So we're stopping to smell the roses. That's a phrase we sometimes use in English just to mean stop and relax, enjoy life. Sometimes we're so busy we don't do that. So we say stop to smell the roses. Take some time out to relax and have some time to think. Well, here, Karen Gleason, we meet her. She is the Vice President of Cancer Services for Northwell Health, and she believes that something is inner peace. Now, we were just talking about there's something about it, and this is what she's referring to, Pauline.
Right. So that something here is like a noun referring back to what is it about gardening that is so special? And she's going, oh, I know what that something is. That something is inner peace. It goes back to that idea that a garden imparts a sense of calm, imparts a sense of inner peace.
That's right. And Karen Gleason says she sees firsthand the stress, both physical and mental, that cancer patients are going through, right? She's dealing with that with her work, and it's difficult, of course, for them. And she tells why gardening can be helpful, Rebecca.
Well, basically, gardening is helpful because they basically stop and smell the roses, like the title of this that
Literally.
we have here. Literally, they go into the garden and they forget about their cancer or about their painful chemotherapy or radiation therapy. They're just there to enjoy the moment and just maybe smell the flowers that smell good and look at the beautiful colors.
And what's great, it's right there in their own front or backyards, right? They don't have to go somewhere. Maybe they don't feel very well, but they can just go outside, sit on the patio, and enjoy the flowers and also all of the insects and birds and so forth that they are attracting.
Right. I mean, I think there's something really healing about beauty. So if that's some people, that's going to be going out on a hike, going to the beach, being able to enjoy the beauty of nature and let that really speak a sense of, all is well with the world. Kind of, I think that's kind of the message that you're hearing when you're in really beautiful, peaceful spaces. And that's a message that's really obviously one that needs to be heard by somebody who's going through such a difficult time, to just kind of have this sense of like, here's a space that feels like things are right and good and beautiful, and that can really speak to people's hearts in a difficult time. And if you have that right in your backyard, that's all the better because it's much easier to access that then.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us. Today we are all out of time, but tomorrow we will continue our discussion on gardens for cancer patients. Until then, this is Brandon.
I'm Pauline.
Rebecca.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Well, we have a very specific focus for this article. We're talking about different cancer patients who found comfort and joy in their gardens after having received a cancer diagnosis. In fact, I think in all of these, we're going to hear about victims of, well, not victims, the people who have gone through breast cancer diagnoses.
When you hear that you have cancer, that's the scariest thing, really, because so many people suffer from that, and there are lots of diseases that would be scary, but I think that's the one that probably people fear the most, maybe.
Well, people fear cancer because they're not sure what will happen. It's not like the flu where you kind of know, like, if I take those drugs for a week or 10 days, I will get well. But with cancer, there's so many possibilities because the cancer cells, they can spread in different ways. Yeah. So for one person, you might get well, but for another person, it might be terminal.
Yeah. And, science has come a long way. There are more people who are surviving cancer today than in the past, but there are also still a lot of people who don't survive. So it's really scary. And so we met a lady yesterday. Her name is Kelly White Rubin, and we learned about her gardens. We learned about the difficulties she went through with breast cancer. And we also met a lady named Karen Gleason, who deals with patients and health services, and she was talking about how gardening can really help people who are dealing and battling with this disease. So today we're going to learn about others who have fought this disease. And we're going to see how gardens have helped them. Yesterday, Pauline talked about how she's worked in gardens, and Rebecca shared some about gardening and so forth, and flowers, and how we enjoy just going out in nature and how therapeutic that is. We keep talking about that word. So we're continuing that discussion today. If you have your magazine, please open it up to page 37. You can also follow along on your digital device as we have our first reading. We'll read there in the left-hand column down through line 23.
Pretty in pink. Vera Caponia admires the walkway she calls her breast cancer garden. On the soil sits a pink ribbon mosaic stepping stone that Caponia crafted from pink tiles. When she planted the area, she was recovering from a stressful year, building up a new business, illustrating 4 books with crazy deadlines, raising 3 children, moving her family of 5 while their house underwent an extensive renovation, and receiving a breast cancer diagnosis. Many people gave me pink ribbon pins that year, and the summer I returned to the house, I just kept buying pink annuals and soon started buying pink perennials, said Caponia, 59. I always have in the back of my head what my surgeon said to me, that stress caused this. The only other risk factor I had for cancer was that I didn't exercise, so I started walking and running and continued vegetable gardening, she said.
Here we meet a lady named Vera Caponia, and she's admiring the walkway she calls her breast cancer garden.
That's right. And there's a couple reasons she calls it that. One is because we read a little further down in this section that most of the flowering plants that she's chosen to plant here are all pink. And pink is the color that is used to symbolize the fight against breast cancer. So sometimes you'll see a pink ribbon like the one that we see in our title. Here on page 36, there's a pink ribbon, and that's a sign of support for people who are fighting breast cancer. And so she's kind of taken that idea and turned a whole garden into her pink ribbon garden. And she also has made, you can see on the top of page 37, a really beautiful stepping stone that's a mosaic tile of a pink ribbon.
That's right, and mosaic is the idea you're bringing these different pieces together and you're creating a pattern or a picture. And oftentimes you're using glass or colored stone, or usually that's what you will see. And that is beautiful. She did an excellent job, creating that, and it's a part of her garden. And so that's something that she can be proud of. When she planted the area, she was recovering from a stressful year building up a new business. But she was doing more than that. What else was she doing, Rebecca?
Well, she was doing a lot. I actually feel stressed out just reading it. She was building a new business. She was illustrating 4 books at the same time. Illustrator is basically someone who draws the pictures, like in what we call illustrations, usually for children's books. Yeah. Like we have picture books, and the illustrations are very beautiful. So she was illustrating 4 books, and at the same time she was raising 3 children, and she was moving her family because her house was undergoing a big renovation. Or maybe people here in Asia don't do renovations as often as in North America, but a lot of North Americans love to renovate their house. Like my cousin, like he'll renovate his basement one year, and then another year he'll renovate the kitchen. And to renovate just means you make like major changes to that space.
Maybe you get new cabinets, a new sink or something for the kitchen, and you just make it look brand new.
Yeah, it's like a construction project, right? And in this case, apparently it was such a large renovation that it wasn't just one room, it was like the whole house. They had to move somewhere else while that was happening. So all of these things are happening. She has, she's working, she's illustrating books that have like really intense deadlines. She's just trying to be a mom and also move her family while all of this construction stuff is happening. And then on top of all of that, she receives a breast cancer diagnosis. This really heavy, scary thing all of a sudden happens in the midst of all that.
So she, needless to say, had a lot going on, a ton of things happening, and she has this cancer diagnosis on top of all the things she's doing. Well, she says, many people gave me pink ribbon pins that year. In the summer, I returned to the house. And so she just kept buying pink flowers as well. They're described as, the first one is annuals, Rebecca.
Yeah, annual is basically a plant that lives for just 1 year or maybe one season. So basically, if you buy an annual, you'll have to buy another one next year because it just flowers 1 year or one season. And that's in contrast to a perennial. I like perennials because it's a lot less work. Like you plant it once and every year at a specific time it will bloom. Or some flowers, they might bloom more than once a year.
All right.
Yeah, I always have this picture in my head of going to a greenhouse in the spring with my mom, and all of us kids would go, and she'd let us each pick out maybe 1 or 2 flowers that we were going to plant in the yard, and she'd kind of give us, okay, this is the area where they weren't too expensive, right? And then she'd say, okay, you can pick out 2, but make sure they're perennials because we want them to come up again next year. So then we learned that word, and she'd show us, and then we'd go pick out the perennials that we would plant in the garden for that year, and then the next year they'd come back.
You get more out of that, right? You can see them more often. Well, I always have in the back of my head, she said, this is Vera Caponia speaking, and she says what her surgeon had told her that stress caused this. Now, I want to talk about that phrase of having something in the back of your head. That sounds kind of funny, but we use that sometimes to mean what?
Yeah, it means that there's something that you're kind of thinking about a lot, but not that you just like sit down and think about it. Like, I'm going to think about this thing right now. It's just kind of running in the background. Like every once in a while when you have a spare minute, you just realize that you're continuing to think about that. It's that idea is kind of subconscious, kind of conscious. It's just something that you kind of can't stop thinking about.
All right. And so she was thinking about what her surgeon said to her, that stress caused all of this. And that's a word that gets our attention. We can all relate to stress. And so we need to be careful because that can cause health problems. And she's saying that her surgeon told her that. And what about the risk factor? She talks about that as well, Rebecca.
Well, a risk factor is something that might cause a illness. Risk factors for cancer, one of the ones here is stress. The other risk factor that they mentioned is she didn't exercise. So she didn't exercise, and if you don't exercise, that usually raises your risk for multiple kinds of illnesses, like whether it's cancer or heart disease, high blood pressure. Just so many kinds of symptoms and illnesses can happen if you don't exercise. And this is something I think we all know, but in our busy lives, often we just don't put in the time or effort to exercise. So I think this is a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah, so what did she do? She started walking and running, but she also continued the vegetable gardening. I always think you need to choose something that you kind of like for a type of exercise. Don't choose something you hate. That's kind of not the best route to go, is it, Pauline?
Absolutely. I know we talked yesterday about things that are good for our spirits, that is like a physical exertion, but it's also good for our spirits. And you said running, and I thought, oh my gosh, that would not be the one for me. You know, it would still be good for my body. I get it, right? But it would not. I don't think it would take a lot of time of me doing that before my spirit really could find enjoyment in it, right? So there are other physical activities I think I could more quickly find enjoyment in while also giving my body some, exercise and getting the benefits of that.
But do something, right? Yes. And that's important. And we need to deal with stress. And sometimes we need to look at the big picture, right? And realize what's really important. Sometimes we stress out over small things and then it's not really that important. And sometimes we are stressed out over things that are important, but I think we can cut some of it out if we change our perspective. Well, next, we're going to learn more about garden therapy as we meet another lady who has gone through, has suffered from cancer and has conquered that. But we're also going to see how gardening helped her. We're going to have our second reading starting there in line 24, the left-hand column, and we're just going to read down through the rest of that column.
Garden therapy. When Abby Lovitz Melendez got a diagnosis of cancer, it was a shock, she recalled. Cancer doesn't happen to you, it happens to everyone else, she said, explaining how incredulous she was at the time. I was working full-time and had 3 young children, and I was worried about my life and that I wouldn't be there for my kids and my husband. It was difficult to keep her spirits up. It was very easy to stay in the house and be depressed at that time, she said.
Next, we meet a lady. Her name is Abby Melendez, and she got a diagnosis of cancer. And of course, this was a shock. I like what she says here next because a lot of us can relate to this, Pauline. She's saying that, oh, cancer, that's what happens to everybody else, but not to me, right?
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, you read it a different way than I did. And I think that might be what she's saying. I was thinking about it in terms of like, that when cancer does happen to you, it happens to everybody else around you as well. That like, but I was thinking, you could be right too. This is a great example of where one sentence could be taken a couple different ways.
And we don't have the full
unfortunately,
context.
we don't have, or we just don't have Abby here to ask her which side she was thinking of. You know, and she might have been thinking about both. I was thinking that, you know, especially if you're talking about a mother, you know, when a cancer diagnosis happens to her, it's not just really her, then all of a sudden you're thinking about my kids and my husband, and if you have a job, it's happening to all, there's this huge ripple effect of all the people that cancer happens to at the same moment. And I think especially if you're like the parent of small children, it feels like this is happening, you're almost more concerned about how it's happening to your family than it is how it's happening to you.
Right. They are having to suffer from that as well.
But you also have a good point. It could also be just a side of like, you always think like cancer happens to other people. It's not going to happen to me.
Right. Yes. You don't think about it till it happens to you, right? And she was really incredulous, right? She talks about how incredulous she was at the time. If you're incredulous, you're kind of doubting something. You're not able to believe it, right? And sometimes we can be in denial, right? We can think, oh, this is not happening, right? We can be in such shock that we don't want to believe it. So what was she doing at the time, Rebecca?
Well, like the Vera lady that we had read about a little bit earlier, she was very, very busy. She was working full-time. She had 3 young children she was raising, and she was doing that at the same time. She was very, very busy. So she was worried that how can I get cancer, and then how can I take care of my family? What about my job? I think these are all questions that she must have been thinking at the time.
Yeah, how can she take care of her kids and her husband and so forth? And so, you know, she already has to deal with this terrible disease, and then she's worrying about that as well, and that's not helpful.
Right, there's a lot of fear, right? Yeah. The fear, the worry that she wouldn't be there for her kids and her husband. And again, there's a couple possibilities for what she means. One, just that like physically being so, racked by disease that she wouldn't get to be like emotionally there for them, that she wouldn't be as present as a mom and as a wife and as an employee maybe too, as she'd want to be. But there's also kind of this other very dark side of like just literally this question of like, will she live? Will she be able to physically be in their lives? What does this mean for the future? And then that's scary stuff. And that is the reality of a diagnosis all of a sudden puts these heavy questions and fear in people's lives.
Or even if she's alive, but she's fighting this disease, so that takes a lot out of her, so she can't do as much as she once did. And so in a sense, she feels like, oh, maybe I can't be there for my kids in the way that I would like to, or for her husband. So it was difficult for her to keep her spirits up. That's a good phrase to highlight. What do we mean, Rebecca, if we say we're keeping our spirits up?
To keep your spirit up just means you continue to stay positive. Like, it's very easy to become depressed or negative, but if you keep your spirits up, you continue to believe that better things will come, and you're very positive.
All right.
But she's being honest and saying she was not doing that well, at least not all the time. And I think it's important to hear that. We often hear really like great self-help articles that are lauding the importance of keeping our spirits up and being positive. But I think it's also important to be honest that it's not easy. And there are times when you will not succeed at that. And you have to be honest and say, like, this is difficult. I am finding it way too easy to stay in the house and be depressed and struggling through that, but not giving up, right? Like finding, and I think that's the story of Melinda saying, like, she's being really honest about how dark that period was, but seems to have a really beautiful story of finding a way through that. And part of it is through gardening, right?
That's an excellent point. She was honest about this. Sometimes we don't want to be honest. We're kind of prideful, honestly. We need to be humble and say, I do need help. And it doesn't mean you complain all the time. I'm not talking about that. But like when you legitimately need help, you need to tell someone, tell your friends, and have those kinds of relationships where you can be authentic with people and say, hey, I'm going through a rough time. I could really use some help. And so that's where she was at. And it was very easy just to stay in the house and to be depressed. And we can all relate to that in different ways. Sometimes we just feel, we're depressed, and so we stay in. And what we actually need to do is get out, right? And I think that will automatically help us to some degree, is just to get out of the house. That's the first step. Well, next we're going to learn more about Melendez and her story. So stay tuned as we have our third and final reading. We're just going to read that right-hand column on page 37.
However, Melendez had marigolds, black-eyed Susans, lilacs, and crepe myrtles. Gardening got me outside, she said. Just being in the fresh air sort of healed me and made me thankful. There's something healing about watching something come to life, because it reminds you that life goes on, she said. I even like weeding. I hear the birds, see the squirrels, catch the slugs, and see the neighborhood dogs put their snouts under the fence, Melendez said. It's very calming to me. It brings me peace and takes my mind off things.
All right, well, Melendez, we learned that she was depressed, but she had some flowers, and gardening kind of helped her to get out of the house.
Right. I like, again, this contrast. She's saying it was easy just to stay in and be in this really dark place, but she had something that did pull on her to get her to move outside and really brought her life. And hopefully we can all find things that will still pull us out when we're in dark spaces, that'll get us, outside in nature or with people. For her, it was her garden.
What is something for you two that you're kind of depressed or down? What do you like to do to kind of get yourself out of that?
I think you need to do happy things. Like we mentioned earlier, the things that make us happy. And you just have to do happy things. So one thing I like to do is go swimming. Yeah. And then I like to go have afternoon tea with my friends because I love to eat dessert. And that makes me happy, but you can't eat too much of that either. Right. Yeah, so you have to do things that make you happy.
Yeah, and being with people.
Being with people might help. And I find that getting out of the house also helps. Because when you're at home, you're not doing anything, your mind just keeps thinking about a problem over and over and over. So usually you get even more depressed. Yeah. So I think one of the keys to getting out of depression is you just need to get out.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
A few things for me. One, of course, is just calling my family, having people in my life that are supports that sometimes that means just sharing with them where I'm at, asking for prayer, being supported in my moments of just really struggling. Other times it's still calling, but listening to what's going on in their life and caring about them and kind of pulling myself out by being present to them. Also, I'm really grateful for being able to have a job. And I think, obviously, for somebody who's going through a serious illness, sometimes they also lose their ability to work, and then that's a different kind of struggle. But if you have the ability to work, man, I will say that I think being forced to get out of my house and just go to work will so often be the thing that keeps me centered and keeps me healthy when I'm having bad moments, because I kind of have to push that all aside and just do work. And by the time work's over, I've given myself enough space that I can come back to maybe those things that were feeling heavy before, and it just gives me a new perspective or some space between it.
Yeah, and we can take that for granted, too. We take our jobs for granted, and we can complain about different things, of course. But here are some people who they don't have the ability to work. And so then we realize, oh, okay, I should be thankful, right? And so when we read stories like this, it reminds us of how good we have it and how thankful we should be. And so I like what both of you said, being with people. I think for me, I'm an introvert, which means I kind of draw energy from like being by myself. But I don't like being by myself like all the time or anything like that. But I think when you're depressed, being around people, the right kind of people who are adding life into you can hugely benefit you.
But I also know I have friends who would say like starting to get really into running I have a friend who would say that was a major factor in turning his depression around. So I think everybody is different. Sometimes it's going to the gym, going to running. Other people it's going hiking, it's getting out into nature. Other people it's the social aspect or finding, I think at some point, if you are deep into a place of depression, you absolutely have to reach out to people for help. Like, I don't think you can just constantly say, well, I'm an introvert, I'm going to do this all on my own. At some point, you need help. But we all are going to have different tools that work more frequently for us, and it's good to know ourselves.
Getting outside of your own mind, that's why it's important to talk to people. But even like reading a book, you can get some like fresh ideas that add life into you and takes your mind off of the negative things. Well, here we see that Melendez, she says, gardening got me outside. She says, just being in the fresh air sort of healed me and made me thankful. There's something healing about watching something come to life because it reminds you that life goes on. And I think this is a great way as we are nearing the end of our program. It's a great way to kind of end talking about reminding you that life goes on. So she was seeing the flowers and all of that outside and the birds, and she was reminded of the beauty of life, Rebecca.
Yeah, I actually think in this aspect, gardening is very, very good because flowers don't stay the same forever. Like, you might wait for the flower to bloom, but the flower will eventually grow and the flower will open, the flower will bloom for a period of time, the flower then dies. But this cycle will happen over and over. So there is a lot of, it's refreshing to watch because things are not static. They're not staying the same. Like the flowers, the plants, they grow and then the cycle goes on. So when you see that, it reminds you that life is very precious and to live in the moment.
All right.
Not to worry so much about tomorrow because tomorrow, just like the garden, tomorrow will come, but your life will still go on.
Well, she enjoyed watching these flowers grow and so forth, but she even says she liked weeding, and I thought, well, that's a bit much for me, but hey.
Well, it made me think back to the first day we talked about the woman who says, like, yeah, it requires physical exertion and stamina to work in a garden. Definitely weeding can really be very physically exerting. But if you've gone through an illness and you didn't have physical strength, you didn't have stamina, and now you're able to, and you're able to, like, have the satisfaction of doing a hard work and watching your garden go from like full of weeds to now like all cleaned up and really looking nice. Like I can see where that's rewarding, and it's also a joy to feel your body working for you.
That's right. And you feel productive, right? You're doing something. You're helping this garden to kind of succeed because you're taking the weeds out and so forth. And so that's beneficial as well. Well, she says that she heard the birds and she was able to see the squirrels, and she was even able to catch some slugs. What is a slug, Rebecca? I haven't seen that. That word doesn't pop up very often. What is that? Yeah,
a slug is basically an animal that kind of looks like a snail, but it doesn't have its shell. So it's like, especially after it rains, like here in Asia, after it rains, often when you're on a path, maybe in the suburbs or maybe near a park, you'll see slugs on the ground.
Now, she said that she caught them. That makes me think of a kid would do that, but I guess she was into that too. Maybe that's like her childlikeness coming out.
Well, they also might be harmful for the garden, so she's probably getting rid of the pests.
There we go. There's a reason behind that. Okay, and then she would see the neighborhood dogs put their snouts under the fence, just talking about their noses. And it's very calming to me. It brings me peace and takes my mind off things.
Yeah, to me, when she's describing all these things, it's just that reminder of when you're in the garden or in nature, depending on your personality type. It sounds like she's the kind of person who, again, you're not thinking about all these other things that are happening in your life. You're just focused on all of this life that's around you. So you're seeing all these little insects and the plants that are coming up, and I can't, that weed, I got to pull that out. And look at the neighborhood dog, and there's some squirrels, and you're just surrounded by all this vibrant life, and it can really make you present to that moment instead of having your mind be off thinking about all the what ifs and what's going to happen and worries that could be on your mind.
All right. Well, we are all out of time for this month's lifestyle article. We hope that you enjoy some peace and quiet today. Just take some time to enjoy life with family and friends. Until next time, this is Brandon.
I'm Pauline.
I'm Rebecca.
Saying goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.